Kubernetes for Humans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Kubernetes for Humans podcast. Today, with me in the show, we have Pavel. Pavel, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, ATL. Nice to be here with you. My name is Pavel Brodsky. I'm the group manager of developer platform at Forder. Responsible for providing a great developer experience for our developers and analysts.
Sounds great. I will say, for full disclosure, I used to work in Forder like 8 years ago before Pavel joined, or right just before you joined. And let's start like a bit about you, Pavel, like a bit about your background, like how did you start like your career? What did you do? And let's take it from there.
So I started up as a backend developer. Started up working in Python mostly, some other languages as well. And at some point, I saw the light and started looking a little bit deeper into how the sausage is made. Started looking a little into Jenkins, Docker, and so on. And so when I joined 4 or 5 years ago, me and the VP of R&D here, Oren, decided that it would be a great fit if I were to join the infrastructure team, which used to be a team, not a group back in the day. It was just me and a couple other guys. And the rest is history. I've been in infra for those 5 years. We transitioned from infra to DevOps to now platform engineering, as is the name of what we do. But it's always been the same, providing the tools and platforms for developers.
I think it's like super cool that you did this transition, because we have a lot of like guests in the episodes, and people come to like a platform or a DevOps like position from like different places. Like we see a lot that came from like the legacy IT, like sysadmins, people that transform DevOps, and you are coming from a like much more like pure like developer, like Python, into that role, which is a bit different. Like why? Like maybe Pavel, if you can share a bit more about like how did you do the transition, like from writing code. I wrote quite a lot of like Jenkins grooving. It's not that fun, right? Like for most people. So why doing that?
I didn't even think about it as being something other than a developer back in the day. So when I joined, I think my official title was something like senior infrastructure engineer, and I saw myself as a software engineer for all intents and purposes. I was just focused on this subset of tools that we use to provide CI, CD, and so on. And I didn't see it as any different from other backend work. With time, I have learned to also know and enjoy the other aspects of the work, which are more opsy. But today, in the way that people work nowadays, most developers, most backend, but also full stack developers are doing ops work to an extent. They need to have Docker runs locally. They need to interact a little bit with CI systems and so on. So I see myself and I see the people on my team as developers first and foremost. And the fact that we're lower on the stack is just an attribute of where we are, but the job is the same. So developers are developers, and focusing on the platform is for me, it's just a way to have immediate wide impact, engineer wide, which I find very gratifying. Plus, my customers are developers, which tend to be better customers than non-developers. So that's just gravy for me.
No, that's cool. So like let's talk about that for a second, because I think, and we didn't even got to the Kubernetes part, but it's interesting. You said that your customers are a developer, and I agree. Like what, or how do you see like a success? Like in the end of the day, if I'm a developer, I'm trying to write my feature. I have my product manager that is telling me you need to write this feature so Joe can like get his, I don't know, like whatever feature we're working on. And it's much more like business oriented, right? Like in the end of the day, everything needs to transition into dollars. Like someone will pay us for this feature, and then we get more money. For you, like like in the end of the day, it's not around like direct impact to money. It's more around developers. So we just finished like 2023, right? Right. Like what is the success for you? Like when we start 2024, what is the success when it comes to like serving your customers? And how do you know you reach those like success criteria?
Yeah, it's something I'm thinking a lot about. So basically, as you said, at some point everything needs to converge to dollars, and the two best ways for me to impact business metrics are one, cost. So I can make my system much more efficient, for example, by migrating EC2 workloads to Kubernetes, as we'll probably talk about. Two, I can impact developer productivity. So common metrics would be things like DORA metrics or space metrics. If my lead time is lower, my time to, or rather the developer's time to market, time to value is shorter, generating more features, more money in the end for Forder. Same for deployment frequency and so on. And a little bit different, but also related. My MTTR, my ability to recover from failures is also important for a company that's heading, but wants to be a public company. Have a posture and a standing that is something that the market can appreciate. And in addition, churn. So human churn, developers. They say that developers leave, they don't leave companies, that they leave managers, which is mostly true. To some extent, they also leave very unpleasant working conditions. And for us, where we have, 17 tastes of ice cream in the fridge, the working conditions are like, do I have to do things manually or do I have automation? Are things self-generating or do I need to define everything? Am I looking at Jenkins all day, or do I have modern UIs? So if the developers are happy, if they're productive, and if costs are going, and margins are going down, then I'm doing my job well. And we have OKRs to measure that, so that's how I'll know that I succeeded at the end of the year.
No, I think, like the dollar is easy to measure, but how do you measure like the satisfaction of the developers? Do you have like surveys or things like that? And by the way, like I think it's a problem or like an area a lot of other people are also like dealing with. Like, how do I know as a platform engineer that I've done my job correctly?
For sure.
Is it interviews? Is it like in the Jenkins you have a small box? Did you enjoy this build? Like, what's the way of like gathering this information?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something we're thinking a lot about. We do have surveys. We're not 100% sure we like their validity. So we're probably going to be evaluating something like DX or getdx.com. They have surveys with market data, so they can compare your results to results of other companies that are of a comparable size and maturity level as yours. We do have interviews. We have a CAB, a customer advisory board, with some senior engineers from all the different teams and groups to come in once every 6 to 12 months, and they help us create a roadmap. We gave a talk about it a while back. I could send you a link to it, and it explains the process there. And basically, we're using the customer input to generate a roadmap, and so then we can say, like, look, you said that those were the 10 most important things to you. We delivered 8 of them. I'm assuming you're happy. Couple this with the satisfaction survey, couple this with some objective metrics like DORA and cost, and you should feel like you're in a pretty good place.
Okay, that's quite cool. Like, I don't think I heard on like a CAB for platform. Quite cool initiative. So it makes total sense. Okay, so let's talk a bit before going into Kubernetes. You said that when you joined as an IC, right?
Yeah.
Or as an IC in a smaller company. Maybe share a bit about the company itself, just so we understand, like, what is Forder, what is the business model, and how did the company transition since you joined the company to this date in terms of both maybe like the infrastructure and also engineering and organization in general, because you do have quite a lot of milestone in the company, right?
Sure. So Forder is in the trust business. The most basic service that we provide is transaction approval or decline based on what we perceive as fraudulent or non-fraudulent information. So, for example, you go on the Nike website, you buy a pair of Air Jordans, they go through us, and we decide whether the transaction looks good or not. We do it at a very, very strict SLA, obviously. We have since expanded into additional fields like payments optimization, 3DS support, and login signups, not just transactions. So basically, if it's a trust issue and we can say this person is legit, this person is not legit, it's something that we're in the business of. When I joined I think that the engineering was about 30 people strong. We are now at about 120. And we probably would have grown more if not for the pandemic and then some market conditions. But I think that kind of the few most interesting things that happened in terms of how the engineering is operating are, one, we used to be in a mindset where everyone does a little bit of everything. We were a strong core of experienced engineers. Everyone knew exactly what to do everywhere, and that was the expectation. This is not something that is sustainable for a larger organization, and so we had to make some trade-offs where we no longer assume that everyone knows everything. We try to create tools and eventually platforms, and I can talk a little about how I see the difference between the two, but we're creating experiences that are easier for new onboardees, which are a much more common occurrence nowadays. I've just hired 4 people in the last 2 weeks just to my group. We want the onboardees to come in and be effective quickly. So we're moving slowly, but moving towards much more vanilla industry standards tooling. So for example, we have our own DSL for creating cloud infrastructure, and we'd like to move towards Terraform, something that people coming from outside will know. Now our Kubernetes solution, which again we'll talk about in a sec, we're trying to give developers just here's pure YAML or pure Helm. Here's the documentation for it because it's open source. Go to town. There's no need for us to insert ourselves into the pipeline between the developer and running their code in production. So that's been a big shift that we had to go through in the platform, in the DevOps group, where we had to understand that we need to relinquish some control, give developers back their autonomy, while still maintaining obviously compliance and security and InfoSec standards, which again we have. It's something we can talk about how we did that. So on my side of things, that was kind of the biggest probably shift in the past couple of years.
No, super interesting. So now let's talk maybe a bit about Kubernetes, right? So you guys were not using Kubernetes, and now you are in the middle of the migration, the start of the migration. You tell me. So maybe first of all, like, how were you introduced to Kubernetes? Why did you decide to migrate to Kubernetes? And how is the migration going so far? So
yeah. So it's actually a second iteration of our trying to migrate to Kubernetes. The previous one resulted in a reverse sim talk that I did on how to reverse a giant architectural decision. So well, basically, we had a requirement to be able to run on multiple clouds. That was about 4 years ago. And we thought, okay, if all of our workloads will run on Kubernetes, it'll make it much more easier to launch the entirety of our platform on another cloud. Now, for various reasons, the cloud thing kind of stalled, but on the Kubernetes side as well, we tried to not even optimistic, just naive, honestly, where we thought like, all right, we have half a year and we've migrated everyone, and that was just foolish. So we didn't have some of the kind of the principles that we have now, where we try that our platform will be composable. We want it to be extensible. We want it to be self-served, for the developers. Back in the day, we were still in the mindset of we need to control how things are created. Everything has to go through our infrastructure monorepo, and it caused a lot of problems. And in addition, we tried to both convert everyone to Kubernetes and add Istio into the mix as a service mesh, which was a bad idea. Not a fan of Istio. Maybe it's me. We had to have it be federated as well, which was basically not supported. So that was a really bad experience. We rolled it back pretty much entirely, and then about a year. And
so one second, Pavel.
Yeah.
Let's talk a second now on the second iteration, which like looks much better, I think, because it is working, right? But how, like I hear also like quite a lot of like companies trying to do like some naive like migration to Kubernetes and like not succeeding, and then doing like a second iteration. When you think about, and you can also talk about like the second iteration, but who is owning the migration? Like I think it's one of the things that we hear quite a lot. Again, like I hear from customers or also other people in the podcast. Is it an architecture that is like the brain behind it? Is it you? Are you like responsible for the success or failure? And like, what did you do in the first iteration? And maybe you changed something in the second. I really don't know the answer, but who should own it? In your opinion, in our company like Forter, who should be the, I'm not sure if it's like the decision maker or like, the one that is responsible for making sure the migration is working.
Yeah. So, but first thing first, we especially in the second iteration, but also in the first one, we have very wide support from the top, the CTO, the VP of engineering. They're on board. They understand it's a well enough established technology that we don't have to go through a lot of hoops to convince everyone that it's worth it in cost, time, productivity, capabilities, negative space that is being lost if you're not in this in this ecosystem. So we had very wide support. Now then, okay, how do we go about it? And I think that right now our main approach is we understood that developers they care a little bit about how their applications are deployed, but not too much. Okay, so they don't really want to know, like, are we using multiple node groups for CPU and memory in EKS? What do we have running there for policy engine support? How is Helm getting picked up by Argo CD? Are we going through Artifactory? They don't care, and they shouldn't care. That's like, they should focus on business logic. So once we start from this premise of, okay, developers should focus mostly on business logic, we then try to derive from it what is the simplest solution we can give them that still gives them the capabilities that they need. And here we had to think a little bit about, okay, what are the capabilities that they have today in the VM world? And do they need all of them? Like, they're used to doing SSH into instances. Obviously, there's no SSH in Kubernetes, or at least like there shouldn't be. Do they need the exact capability, or are really nice logs enough? So like some thinking had to go into it. But then, like, yes, I feel that we are the ones responsible for the migration. Once the developers get a taste for, oh, my deployment can be 30 seconds instead of 20 minutes. Yeah, I'm taking everything and their grandmother and migrating it to Kubernetes. But initially, they're skeptical, and they're especially skeptical because we had a failure in the past and it didn't go well. And we had the smaller but some significant failures in the middle where, like, spoilers, we tried to do service mesh again with console and dropped it as well. So they were like, we're not sure about your infrastructure, about your networking, about your security, about your stability. So it's on us to convince them that the system is indeed production ready. And we're treating this as not as, okay, here's a GA, here's the documentation, now go migrate. No, we go team by team. We schedule time with them, we sit with them, we do discovery session with them to understand whether they have special needs. And we make sure that they migrate fully before we move on. and we don't leave them to their own devices. We understand that we'll also need to be doing workshops or the like, teaching people about Kubernetes, because it's an entire world, right? All this ecosystem. But once people get a little bit used to it, they love it because it's way better. And then they do the job for us, right? So then they become the evangelist, and then they go and bother their managers like, yes, we migrated those 3 systems. Let's migrate the other 20 that we have. And we're only happy to help. And obviously each migration, especially in the same team, becomes way easier than the first few. So in some, we own it. We provide the platform, we provide the compute layer, be it Kubernetes or EC2. And obviously we also are responsible for the experience of using this compute layer. So yeah, I feel like we are the owners of it.
No, that makes sense. So let's talk in a second. We'll talk about the second one, but I'll just like reinforce some of your points that you said. In the end of the day, like good developers or like experienced developers are usually skeptical around new technology, right? Like Pavel, I think you know that. I think I know that as well. Like everyone that is promising like this new shiny thing that is going to solve all of your problems. And you mentioned Istio and Console, right? Which I think are like a very like nice example of that. Are like, you know, like again, like if you saw enough production, then like skepticism is like a healthy trait to have. And I think the thing with Kubernetes, unlike most other technologies, and what's making him a bit more complex, as you mentioned as well, is like the ecosystem. Like when you migrate to Kubernetes, it's not like take my Docker and like run it somewhere else, which this is how it sounds like, right? Like I have a Docker, I'll just move it. Kubernetes comes with it with its own layer of networking, storage, credentials, configuration. It's like for migrating like a single application, like real application, to Kubernetes, you need to think both about the application itself, but also around the overall ecosystem, which makes the migration like a much more complex than sometimes it is shown. And I think what you also mentioned around finding those like early adopters, right? Like in any technology that will be like the messiahs of like Kubernetes inside the organization. We heard it also like in a couple of episodes here. Most of the time, the platform team can say to everyone, you are going to use Kubernetes, and if not, you are fired. You need to gain that trust inside the company. You need to make sure that people gain something from that. And you mentioned the CD part, like instead of 20 minutes, now it's 30 seconds. And I think it's very important, again, for like a platform team to understand that it's not like the developers are like evil, right? Like they want also to succeed in their job, and they were burned, again, from different technologies along the way. And I will say, by the way, my experience with Istio is, and I think I told you that back in the day, like Istio is like you take something very complex like Kubernetes, and then you add another very big complexity layer, which is Istio, and like it's at different levels of complexity. So I will advise most people who are not in a like big company that have the team to support it. Like Istio is not like plug and play, like so much fun, everything is working. No. Usually it requires like a lot of trial, error, frustration, and expertise to make it work. Like we see it from all of our customers. Some do love Istio in the end, but they have like a Istio team in the company responsible for making sure Istio is working. Okay, so we talked a lot about the first migration. Now let's jump into the second one. What did you do differently? What's the status, and what can we learn from this?
Yeah, so I already mentioned a few things and principles that guided us. So it was very important for us that the developers be able to understand what's happening, basically using Google and open source documentation. Mm-hmm. So our setup is pretty simple. It's basically a vanilla EKS cluster, nothing too fancy that we install on it. We integrate with our observability stack, so it has Prometheus exporter built in, including Loki for logs. So if your service is running on our Kubernetes, you automatically get logs in Loki, nice retention, nice searchability, metrics, obviously. So that's all working out of the box. And the out of the box part is crucial for us because it's way easier to integrate things out of the box in Kubernetes just because the way that it's configured with controllers and operators than it would be in our VM setup. Then for deployments,
I just stop here for a second. Like the alternative, let's say that you're not doing this in a vanilla, it means that you need to write everything, right? Like you need to make sure that you document everything, you document the changes and so on. And what you're doing is basically uploading all of this to use the DevOps tool, read their documentation. It's better than mine, read their issue or whatever. And this, like in turn, because you are not creating another Pavel abstraction for your Kubernetes layer, it allows them to be much more self-sufficient without like you in the middle.
Exactly. Plus, like, presumably I'm not smarter than the people who created the Kubernetes API, so I'll just let it do its job. And I'm assuming that it means decreasing the onboarding time for a new developer by a significant margin, whether be it new developer in general or just a developer that's migrating to Kubernetes now. Based on the same thinking, we did evaluate other tools, but we went with some of the most common ones for things like deployments. So we're using Argo CD. We're big fans of Argo, so we're also using Argo workflows for jobs. So we're trying to migrate our Jenkins solution for scheduled and event-based jobs to Argo workflows. We've just recently integrated Argo rollouts for progressive delivery, so canary deployments and so on. And so far, it's been working pretty good for us, but it's still early days. And that's a capability that we didn't have to the same extent and still don't have in the VM solution. So that's like one of the strengths of Kubernetes. If you want to do something, probably someone already has an operator for it, and you just Helm install it. And it's not like, if it's not as complex as something like a service, it'll probably just work pretty well for you. So you get those out of the box with us as well. And continuous deployment, again, it's not something that we easily had in the previous solution. So we're just creating new capabilities that are hopefully like enough of them stack up that it becomes just such a no-brainer for developers to decide to go with the new solution.
Did you change also like the strategy? Like I'll be honest, I didn't watch your talk. I will do it later and we'll add it to the notes. But did you change the scope of the migration? Like, is it migration one by one, or it was also like one by one back then? Like, is something changing the migration roadmap itself?
Yeah. So then we had really strict time limits, and it was on us to push back against the business and say, like, it's not possible, can't be done. Let's just not go there and waste time. So this time we're a little bit more mature and sober with how we approach the milestone setting and the dating. But also, as I said, the principles are really core to the way we approach things. So whenever we evaluate a new feature that we want to add or a tool that we want to add, we ask ourselves, like, is it composable? Can developers use it themselves without using our entire pipeline? Do we have reasonable escape hatches everywhere, which is something that we didn't have before? You had to go all in or entirely out of the pipeline. Now we're like, okay, you wanna, you don't want to use our CI, but you want to have the rest of the deployment mechanism. That's cool. Either an API, you can use it from your command line or a UI, and you're free to go. Is it extensible? Is it built well enough so that other developers can add capabilities to it? So we have, for example, we introduced Kyverno recently as a policy engine for validations, and we want the security team to be able to provide new policies, because obviously they're best suited to do it. We don't want them to be blocked on us, and that's kind of like a guiding principle. How do we make this migration and this transition without not just not being blockers, but being enablers? So now people come to us and they're like, hey, I'm thinking of launching Flink at Porter. It would be way easier for me if I just bring in a Helm chart and install it on a Kubernetes cluster. And we're like, sure, go ahead. You're good. You're good to go. Maybe just move the Docker images to ECR, but other than that, you're good. And it's not something that we could have done before. So that's the power of using like industry standard vanilla tooling that is as flexible as it gets.
I'll say like two things, and then like maybe like a small follow-up question. First of all, to everyone listening to that, like, and I'll just give like this as a heads up, like Kubernetes is not really that simple, right? Or Flink is not that simple. If you install a Helm Flink shard, it will probably work for the hello world, but usually like Flink by itself is like super complex. It's not that Kubernetes made it super easy. It made it easier to set up. But again, like a lot of the times for Helm charts, you install them, they work fine, but then there is like the fine-tuning, understanding. I need it in like HA, right? High level, yeah, HA, or I need this, or I need that, or I need that. Helm gives like sometimes like a false feeling that everything is like easy to install, because it is easy. Again, like try to install Jenkins Helm, super easy. Try to maintain it like a month later, much harder. So that's just like a small heads up. But I really love what you're saying about the game, like not being a blocker and giving the user the power to do things like without needing you. Again, like you are not as a blocker. I'll ask like one more small question about the migration. How did you start the second phase? Like, what was the first application that was migrated? Like, should I migrate the newest thing, the oldest thing, the one that people know Kubernetes? Like, what's the good migration strategy in your opinion?
So we started with ourselves. We ate our own dog food, and we migrated our services. Because we're a platform team, we don't really have services with high traffic needs and so on. So our use cases were simple for the most part, not super interesting. So we found one partner, the kind of design partner, with very high needs and a very specific use case that benefits the most from Kubernetes, which is they had to have very fast and very efficient auto scaling, which is something that they didn't have in our EC2 solution. And so they were motivated enough to go with us through this journey and have some small failures here and there, but persevered. And now they're really happy campers running all of their systems, not just the one that they migrated initially on Kubernetes. And they're kind of our biggest evangelists at the moment. So find someone who needs you as much as you need them, because otherwise they won't be interested enough to invest in it in the long haul. And it can be deploy time, it can be auto scaling, it can be capabilities like what we talk about with Flink, it can be something else like really fast reverts or some capability that is impossible for them to get right now or super difficult. And they need to be motivated enough to stay with you through thick and thin while you figure things out.
Okay, that's cool. So I think like we are almost run out of time. I will say, by the way, like Porter is like one of Commodore customers. We didn't talk about it too much, but we're also trying to help our best with the migration part. And Pavel, maybe a bit about the future for Kubernetes, like what's your prediction, what's up in store, both for like Kubernetes in Forster, but also Kubernetes in general.
So last year, we basically, outside of the platform group, we had one big customer, the one that I mentioned right now. And this year, our goal is to kind of cross the chasm from early adopters to kind of late adopters, maybe in the beginning there. So maybe something like 30% of the workloads that Forter has to move to Kubernetes. And presumably in 2025, we'll only leave the laggards behind, and some use cases really are more difficult. So stateful apps, we're a little bit more hesitant still, even though we are looking into running Elasticsearch or maybe even Aerospike on Kubernetes, something we are looking at actively. So adoption is currently our number one priority, and we're figuring out the capability that we need to implement in order for people to feel comfortable with our offering. So probably more along the availability spectrum, or rather the reliability spectrum, which is something that hopefully Commodore can help us with the new beta offering. Plug, unpaid. We're excited about that because being able to like visibly show our customers how the system is doing, and have a nice status page that helps them upgrade and maintain their clusters, or us maintain the big cluster that most of the developers will be using, is going to be crucial for generating trust in the solution. And we'll be adding many more capabilities. So we're looking at things like, as I said, progressive delivery. We want to improve our Helm offering. We started with like one big chunky Helm chart, and we're now breaking it up into multiple modules, making it so that developers can pick and choose the parts they want to integrate. Makes sense in retrospect, but
no, it's hard to implement. Like, it makes sense, but I will say again, as someone who have done that, like, it sounds very logical, but the implementation is like so much. It's like not fun. Like, in the end of the day, Helm, it's super popular. I don't see any contender, but sometimes when you're like a big organization, it can drive you crazy. Like, because like it's own weird.
Very easy to use and very difficult to maintain as a creator of Helm charts. Because in the end, it's a templating language. It's very limited in what it can do, and it gets ugly really, really quickly at the back end, at the template level. But for the user, it's still a pretty good experience. And the ability to like put Helm templates and just vanilla YAMLs one beside the other is super powerful. So I understand why it caught on, but it's not as easy to maintain as it may look from the outside.
Yeah, I'll say, by the way, like, I'm a really like big like Helm fan, like in general. But again, like it's like a lot of other things in Kubernetes. It's misleading between the easiness of adoption to the real life production use case. And there's like such a big gap between the two. Like Helm install, the easiest thing ever, and it works. Helm maintaining for like big organization, you become like a templating guy, how do you say it? Indenting like guru, if it's like 4 or 8 or whatever. So any last word, Pavel? Do you want to talk about something that you care about? Do you have a book, a blog post, a lecture that you recommend people of like viewing?
Sure, I'll send you a couple of links to a couple of lectures. And I have a blog that is going to turn into a book soon. So stay tuned for that. No, I'll just say that, like, for the people who are making these migrations, be very, very kind to your customers, because they're coming in knowing nothing and they're scared. And it's your job as platform or DevOps or whatever engineers to make them feel comfortable with this new change, because it is a seismic, a tectonic change. They will love it in the end, but in the beginning, don't feel discouraged by them being skeptical of you. It makes sense for them to be that way, and just work slowly and methodically with them, and earn your trust, and it'll be worth it in the end.
Okay, cool words. I think we can wrap with that. Thanks a lot for our super interesting episode, Pavel. It's the first out of 3, I think, that we'll do more on migration. I had a lot of fun, and thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you.